picture's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a review of The Absolutist by John Boyne, his novel from 2011. First, let's start with something really positive. His more recent novel from last year, The Heart's Invisible Furies, was my top read of 2017. That is very good news. Unfortunately, this is the worst book I have read so far in 2018. So, let me try to explain why. It's going to be a bit of a rant. So again, let's start off with stuff that's positive. He's a good writer. There is a couple fully realized scenes that I will never forget. Scenes of World War I warfare. He's also really good at leaving a cliffhanger at the end of each chapter. Very effective. The opening scene is very humorous, about an elderly lady that the protagonist is speaking to on the train, who is recalling some of the murders she had committed over the years. There were some few bright spots. Otherwise, this was an awful novel, just the worst. It's about Tristan Sadler, who fought in World War I in France, and comes back, I guess, shell-shocked and somewhat wounded, and certainly post-traumatic stress. And he's gay, and he had been disowned by his family before the war as a teenager. He'd been kicked out of the home, and then he went off to war, and he has a bit of a love affair with one of the other soldiers, Will Bancroft. By the way, no spoilers here. This is stuff that I'm sure it's on the back cover, and certainly within the first chapter or two. I will avoid spoiling anything that happens farther in than about 20 pages, okay? It had the potential to be a riveting, heartbreaking novel, but, I mean, again, to reiterate, the good news is he got better. The Heart's Invisible Furies is full of fully realized characters and scenes. This book, not so much, is the understatement of the year. The characters didn't make sense, they weren't coherent, and there are almost no scenes in this novel. This novel was so effing talky. Dialogue, and so much of the plot was told to me through the characters' dialogue. Now that's a pet peeve. Maybe that's a personal preference, but if somebody dies in a novel, I don't want to be informed of that through a conversation that other characters are having. I want a scene. Is it too much to ask? I want a scene. Very little in the way of scene and ponderous dialogue. And not only too much dialogue, too much conversation. I have a lot to say about the conversation. But what was just expository prose still read like the author was having a conversation and just giving me summaries of what was happening. I couldn't visualize, except with a few notable exceptions, I couldn't visualize or imagine anything in any depth or any of the characters. It was just like some stranger was telling me a story and he wasn't a very good storyteller. And that kind of breaks my heart to say about John Boyne, because he's a gifted storyteller, but in this book, what happened? The other thing that drove me maybe the craziest was the conversations that people had in this novel, set in 1916 and 1919 with a ridiculous ending in about 1979. They were talking like they were on the freaking Oprah Winfrey Show, laying bare their feelings and sharing their emotions. People didn't do that, or they certainly didn't do it in the way that it's written here in 1916. There's a ridiculous scene where Tristan meets the mother of somebody who had been killed in the war. Meets the parents of somebody who'd been killed in the war, and they immediately start processing their feelings, and she reveals to Tristan Sadler, the main character, that her mother had committed suicide. And it was just like, people didn't open up and talk to strangers like that. They barely do now, except on Oprah. But I mean, it was just puke-worthy the way the modern idiom of sharing your feelings was grafted onto this story from World War I. It didn't make sense. It was extremely grating. If you're going to write a novel set in history, don't make the Oprah Winfrey Show your primary research source. So those are my main criticisms. It was just a flawed novel, and I am in the minority here. This has got a 4-star rating on Goodreads. People who I know who've read it loved it. They said it's their favorite John Boyne novel. The sergeant in charge of these soldiers, first they're training at Aldershot in the UK, and then they go to France, is Sergeant Clayton. And he's supposed to be one of those demented soldiers a la, what's that movie? It's based on the Joseph Conrad novel, Apocalypse Now. He's supposed to be one of those, but I could never imagine him. He didn't make any sense. He was just a patchwork of foibles and weird dialogue, but he was supposed to be evil. He was just loud. He didn't make sense. And also, Tristan meets, a large part of the novel is a couple years after the war, Tristan goes to meet Will's sister, and she's weird in a way that she's not coherent. She starts arguing with him within 5 minutes, and every 5 minutes she's trying to be nice, and then she's arguing, and they're perfect strangers, and then her ex-boyfriend is stalking them in the cafe and picks a fight with Will, and it was just this melodramatic garbage. It was unnecessary, badly executed. The entire novel was really poorly executed. I mean, there's a archetypal plot. Gay guy falls in love with a bi-curious guy. They have sex. The bi-curious guy disappears or turns on him. That's a heartbreaking story. Here, it's laughably told. Apparently they had sex. You wouldn't know it from the writing here. It felt like it was being written in 1940. Just, gestured to words of some touching. I mean, that was ridiculous, but minor complaint compared to all the things I hated. As I mentioned, there's some scenes during battle in the trenches, particularly, and it's a really important part of the story, so I'm only going to refer to it obliquely, about what these British soldiers do with a young German prisoner of war. And that scene was really well told. So, I mean, it's not... And this entire book is well told. He could do it. What was he doing? It was like he phoned this novel in. I don't recommend it. One last little gripe. We find out near the end of the novel that Tristan's sister died after he was kicked out of the home. She was a young woman, and she gets sick and dies. This is not a spoiler, because when I read that, it was like he had a sister. Maybe it was mentioned, but I mean, nothing was like, who the hell is she? Am I supposed to feel something about... So, I was bitterly disappointed by this, and I think John Boyne is still probably going to be one of my favorite writers, based on how much I loved The Heart's Invisible Furies. He's got a new one coming out end of August. I think I'm doing a buddy read with James Chatham and Chris of Chris Bookish Cauldron. As soon as it comes out, I'm hoping for better things. I hope this was just part of his learning curve. However, again, to reiterate, lots of people, go check it on Goodreads, lots of people, this was a 4 and a 5-star read. So don't take my word for it. The last point is, this just reiterates that I don't really have, with the exception perhaps of Virginia Woolf, I don't have favorite authors. I only have favorite books. And this one ain't on that list. Thanks for watching.